computer. Does everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
We also hear noise in the background.
Well, that's probably, that noise will go away. You still hear the noise?
Oh, no,
No?
no.
It's better? Okay. Let's move over to the computer. You don't have to see my shade. The whole shear.
We want the
Okay.
proper ambiance here.
What?
We need the right ambiance.
The ambiance. Okay, so
Yeah.
you have all my svarim behind me.
That's perfect.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm so happy to see you. We're back in business. I usually start right after Sukkot, but I had chasanas last week or two. So Mitzvah Shem will be meeting every week from now on. Okay, tonight, and it's nice after we had a long hiatus. So, but it's nice. It's beautiful to be back together with you. Tonight's topic is a very fascinating one. There is a tshuva written by Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein, who is a very prolific author. He's also the Rav of Ramat Elchanan. He's written many svarim, Aleinu Shabech, and other svarim. And he has a beautiful tshuva.
He's the son-in-law of Rabbi Yashav.
He is the son-in-law of Rabbi Yashav. And his wife is the granddaughter of Rabbi Levine, because Rabbi Yashav was a son-in-law of Rabbi Levine. So so he has a beautiful tshuva about the following topic. Here, let's just see. I'll just show you the shaila, and then I'll talk a little bit. She'ela, be'ikvos hispashtus nagif hakorona, because in the presence of the coronavirus, huchra zaydei mumche habrios. The Board of Health, Takana Magvila is Kahagus Shel Bnei Adam, Rabbi Makmecha. The Board of Health limited the amount of people that could be present at one time. Ubikarev Gaboy Kama Batikane Sios, and the Gaboyim have a number of shuls. It's Ora Sheila Haba. They have the following shaila. Kedei Lavi Lekach Shiyosef Yosef Nashim Yisko Luspalo Bitzibur, in order that they should be able to accommodate all the men that want to daven, they want to divide the people into two groups, because you can only have a certain amount per group. So let's say they can have 50 in each group. So they'll have one group in the shul. They're going to displace the women. They're going to take over the Ezras Nashim, and they're going to have a group of men davening there. Oh, I have a highlighter. I forgot. Let me just get my highlighter. Here we go. I'll put the highlighter at the beginning of the line instead of reading the words with the highlighter. In order to implement this, we have to ask the women not to come to daven. They shouldn't come to hear davening and laning. It's going to create a lot of distress for many of the women. What questions? What should we do? Should we say the men take precedence because men have a chiyuv to daven b'minyan? Or maybe the women, it's their place. You don't have a right to throw somebody out of their place. Now we had almost the same shot. Let me just show you. This is Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein. This is a beautiful picture of Yitzchak Zilberstein. You could see the beautiful Hajjus Panim that he has. He's amazing. The amount of the svarim and articles and essays that he writes is unbelievable. Just with the coronavirus, he put out a number of contrasim. So the Aleinu Shabech is his, yes. So
Everybody should be muted.
who should be muted? Oh, everybody should be muted.
I think so.
because we're getting, do I do the muting?
Everybody can mute themselves.
They should mute themselves, and that way they can unmute if they want to talk.
Correct.
All right. Everybody, please mute themselves. Okay. So before we delve into the Shaila, I want to make it clear that the Shaila is not, are women important? By the way, we had the same Shaila in our shul, because when we first started having minyanim on the outside in the parking lot, we just assumed that the women we would give preference to the men because men have a chiyuv tefillah, and there were a number of women who were very upset. How come we don't have a right to daven with a minyan? Now it's a little bit different than Rabbi Zilberstein's shaila, because in Rabbi Zilberstein's case, you're taking away a place that the women had. It's the Ezras Nashim, and you want to commandeer the Ezras Nashim. That's not the same as if you were davening in the parking lot. The women never had a place to daven in the parking lot. But nonetheless, we had to deal with a similar shaila, and we tried, once the women spoke to us, we tried to make accommodations that there should be a place for the women. So just as an introductory remark, I don't want anybody to think that the shaila is that maybe women are less important than men. I think some women will be listening this year as well, so we just want to make it clear, even if they weren't listening, we have to make it clear what the reality is. I want to, two Mar Makomas I want to share with you about the importance of women in Jewish hashkafa. The Rambam says in Hilchos Ishus, "V'chein tzivu chachamim sheyehei adam mechabed ish liyos migufo v'oav k'gufa." A man has to be mechabed his wife more than his own self by, let's say, by buying her proper clothing, or that she should have the proper kavod, and he has to love her k'gufo. All of a k'gufo is because the Chumash says, "V'after re'acha kamocha." You have to love other people like yourself. He doesn't have to love her more than himself, but he has to love her equivalent to himself. If he's wealthy, so he should purchase things for her so she could live a life of luxury. He shouldn't treat her in a way that she feels fear. He should talk to her in a pleasant way. He shouldn't be verbally abusive. He shouldn't be depressed, and he shouldn't be angry. So this is the Jewish view of the relationship between a husband and wife, which the Rambam wrote this about 1,000 years ago, and it's all rooted in the Gemara, and the Gemara is rooted in the Chazal, and Chazal is rooted in earlier sources. So even before we had women's equality here in America and around the world, but the Jewish way is to practice equality with women and to treat them with great respect. There's another Mar Makom that's from this coming week's Parsha. It's worthwhile mentioning. When when Yishmael was growing up, and he was starting up with Yitzchak, so Sarah was very upset, and she told Avram to chase away Hagar and Yishmael. So Avram was perturbed by that, and the Rebbeinu Shalom told Avram, "Kol asher tomar lecha Sarah shma b'kol." Whatever she says, listen to her. So what does Rashi famously say? Shma b'kol ruach hakodesh shaba. You listen to her ruach hakodesh. L'manu shahaya Avram tafel Sarah b'nevius. This is amazing Rashi. That Avram was secondary to Sarah. Sarah was a bigger navi than Avram. You know, we always think, okay, Sarah, she was Avram's wife, but Avram, he was the one, he had the Akedah, and he was the one that was, all the stories in Chumash are about Avram. So you would think that Avram was a greater person than Sarah. But at least in terms of Ruach HaKodesh, Sarah was greater than Avram Avinu. So this is the Jewish view, that a woman...
By the way, Rabbi Luban?
Yes?
You forgot Rabbi Soloveitchik's basic proof about women. All
Yes.
the halachas, all the basic halachas of tefillah are learned from Chana, who was a female.
That is correct. The Gemara in Brachos learns all the halachas of tefillah from Chana, the Himid Daberes Aliba, and the Gemara has a whole slew of halachas we learn from Chana. There are many, many indications that in Jewish life, men and women are treated equally. It's true that women, do not have certain halachic obligations. If it's specifically mitzvah aseh as magrama, but that's whatever the reason is. Some say it's so they should have the time to deal with the house. Some say it's because they don't need to do the mitzvah, as many mitzvahs as the men. They're more religiously sensitive. Without the mitzvahs, they daven better than men without having a requirement to daven with a minyan. Whatever the pshat is, men and women are equal. So the basis for this shayla is not because maybe the men are more important and therefore will displace the women. The basis of the shayla is, do we say men have a chiyuv to daven with a minyan? It's a mitzvah, at least the Rabbanan, to daven with a minyan, and the Shulchan Aruch says that you should be mishtadel to daven with a minyan. Some say it's a chiyuv, some say it's a preference, but either way, men are supposed to daven with a minyan. A woman is not required to daven with a minyan. So the question is, do we say that the women should defer to the men because the men have a chiyuv to daven with a minyan, or should we say that you can't have no right to take away the women's place in the shul? That's the shayla. So Rabbi Zilberstein says as follows: Reishis kol netzayin ki atakana lahagbilos misbar mispal veis knesses kvar hasalamim. This notion that in the time of a plague or a pandemic or epidemic, you limit the amount of people that daven in shul. This is not a new thing that was invented by the boards of health around the world, or Dr. Fauci, or the CDC. This is the way it was years ago as well, centuries ago. And he quotes, about 200 years ago, his pastor gave his holy cholera, the Poland that he was out. Famous letter from Rick Veger. I think I once showed you the letter a few months ago. So Rick Veger writes, even though their scientific knowledge and the medical knowledge 200 years ago was much more primitive than what we have, but they knew that it spreads by contact. So therefore, he says, having a lot of people in a small area is bad. Unless you aspire kitoski, so they could daven in small groups. You shouldn't have more than 15 men. You have to enforce that more than 15 people should not come to shul. Shomer, police. You know what police is? It's a Hebrew word, I guess. You should have enforced it with the police. The Hainu Shoter, Lashkiach B'zeh. Once they have the requisite amount, nobody else is allowed to come in. And then he says, okay, he doesn't quote the rest of this piece. The Rick Veger said that if the people don't listen, then you tell the police, and if they don't listen to the police, then the police will go to the government and have it enforced. That's because it's pikuach nefesh. So it has to be enforced. I was in Teaneck for a simcha a few weeks ago, and I was very impressed. I wanted to daven Marav with the shul because I was leaving the wedding, and they weren't ready to daven Marav at the wedding. So I asked if there's a minyan in the shul. They told me that this is in the Romer shul. So they told me there's a minyan in the backyard of the shul. The wedding was also in the parking lot. So I went into the backyard, and I got the minyan, let's say, was 6. I got there 5 to 6. All of a sudden, this lady shows up, and she says, "What's your name?" I tell her my name, Yaakov Luban. She says, "Are you a member of the shul?" I said, "No." She said, "You can't daven here." She basically told me to. So I was not at all insulted. I was impressed that. I mean, she said that these are the rules. The minyan is open. You have to sign up in advance, and you have to remember the shul. So that's the right way to do it. So Rick Veger says you limited it to 15 people at a time. The Rick Veger gives various aids for how you maintain proper hygiene. And then he says, we should make note of the fact that he says, "Shagol lidog." You shouldn't become depressed and you shouldn't worry. So this idea of limiting the attendees is a valid. It's not only the Board of Health that is instituting it, but it's something that we should do on our own. So therefore, the question is, do we have a right to take away the places of the women? So he says, we can bring proof from Rikveger himself, from his tshuva. The same takanas appear in a sefer called the Takanas Rikveger. Rikveger arranged for how they should daven in Yom Narayim. The same way we paid special attention to davening Yom Narayim, so that he did also. It's so familiar to what we're doing. There should be an empty seat between one person and the next. And at home also they shouldn't sit next to each other. These are the backyard minyanim. You should do the same thing if you're having a minyan. If there's no room in shul, we argue a minyan without batim. They should do the same thing in the backyard minyanim. He doesn't talk about masks. I don't know if they knew then that you should wear a mask, but he's talking about social distancing. And it's clear from Rikveger's tshuva that when they limited the amount of men that could daven in the shul, and they said that there has to be one space between one and the other, and as a result, they'll have to have minyanim at home, backyard minyanim. The women continued to daven in the Ezras Nashim. They didn't expel the women in order that the men should have more place. The women had the same takanas that they had for the men, they had for the women. And in the women's section, they also appointed people to be in charge to make sure that they sit properly. Yeah, that in the women's section also they should have every other seat. So you see that they didn't do away with Ezras Nashim, even though many of the men would have to daven at home. They didn't have a time and say, we come first. The Rikveger felt, no, the women come first. The women, that's their place. And so Rabbi Zilberstein now is going to quote the words of Rikveger where he says this. He says, can I see you? Same, this is what Rikveger wrote. Rikveger, by the way, lived in the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, and he was considered the one of the Gedolei Yisrael whose opinion was held in the highest esteem by all members of Klal Yisrael. And today we still study Rikveger's Svarim. Rikveger's Svarim are the depth are breathtaking. So anyway, Rikveger says, Zelu Shana Sham. B'chol batei kinasiyos heim be'ezras anashim heim be'ezras nashim. In all the shuls, both in the men's section and women's section, mutter yeh barosh Hashanah v'yom haKippurim litvos rak es machzis hamakomos. On Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, they should only, at a maximum, they should only use 50%. That was before Governor Murphy said that. B'tzura kazu, shelo kol makom sheyoshim bo, hamakom sheni hagovu imo lo yetovos. They'll make sure that there's only 50% because they're going to have every other seat's going to be empty. It's so amazing how it's mamish the same things that we were doing with Rikveger dealt with 200 years ago. And since everybody has equal rights, and who's going to have the right to daven in the shul? We had the exact same problem, the same shaila. We we couldn't accommodate. Everybody wanted to be in the shul. Everybody wanted to hear the chazan, the Yatankin. So, but we didn't have enough. Not everybody could be in the shul. So we said, first come, first serve. Whoever signs up first will be in the shul. Whoever signs up after the shul's full, then they'll be in the gym. But that didn't work out too well because we said the sign up will start at 11 a.m. 11 a.m., 200 people tried to sign up, which was more than the amount of people we were going to allow. So then we came up with it, and then the system crashed. So then we came up with an idea that what we're going to do is we'll do a lottery. But the people didn't like that either. So in the end, we thought what we'll do is we'll flip it. We'll have one group will be in the shul for Rosh Hashanah, and the other group will be in the shul on Yom Kippur. So that idea is not original because the Rebbe says the exact same thing. Titlos, he says the one group should be in the shul on Rosh Hashanah, and the other group, the other 50%, the Machzah Shni, Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur, because it's a longer davening, is the equivalent of 2 days Rosh Hashanah. Kedei shetusak hamatar shebikol shnei mikol yeshiva b'beis. So both this way, everybody feels that they have a place. You see, the Rikveger understood the importance of equality, and then he says, "Hagon av bezdin." There we go. Certain people don't have to go from one shul to the other. The Av Bezdin, the head of the community, and the Dayanim, and the Hagabai HaChodesh, the basic Knesset, they used to appoint a new Gabai every month, apparently. The HaMishubadim, the basic Knesset, I'm not sure what they were, but people had some kind of responsibility in Shul. But Omed Luskan Kol Shana came in again upon, and there was somebody who was in charge of the Shul the whole year. V'chein Baalei Tfilos, V'atokim B'yomam, and also the people who are davening the Chazanim and the Baalei Tkiya. All these people don't have to move. V'chein, here's the line that we wanted to get to. V'chein Ezras Nashim. Now I tried to figure this out. If somebody thinks that I'm explaining it wrong, you'll tell me. V'chein Ezras Nashim harabanim tichya. What does it mean, Ezras Nashim harabanim? I think it means that they had a special area for the women who were Rebbetzins, who were married to the Rabbanim.
I think it's actually easier to say that it just means harabanit tichye.
It says Rabbanim.
I know. I think it's a typo, just like on the.
Yeah,
I think that's also. I think this is just a typo.
Okay, so I struggled for nothing. Either way, he says that the women, the Gabals. Well, but which women is he talking about? He has to be talking about special women. Oh, you're saying harabanit. Yeah, and Nashim harabanit.
V'chein Ezras Nashim, and it's so, and also in the Ezras Nashim we have harabanit tichye ve'gabaot b'chol beit knesset.
Okay, say harabanit. There's one rabbanit. Okay, the Rebbetzin. The gabaos b'chol basic knesset yishmru al amakum l'seim came Rosh Hashanah heim b'yom kippur. All these people, because they're serving the needs of the shul, they don't have to switch places. That means that I didn't have to dive in the gym. And one day Rosh Hashanah, I went to dive in the gym. I could have stayed in the shul the whole time because Rikveger says that the Rabbanim could stay in the shul. But I didn't think that was a nice thing to do. So I wanted to show Iman Lochi B'tzara that I felt the pain of the people. So you see, it's clear from Rikveger that you don't expel the women in the Ezras Nashim so the men can daven there. You don't remove, push aside the female for the male. Eliezer. What's Rav Shach's name was Eliezer?
Eliezer Manshach.
Eliezer Manshach. Correct. Eliezer Manshach. So he says, so he brought a right from Rikveger to the Shaila that the women have a right to hold on to the Ezras Nashim. You don't put the men in the Ezras Nashim. But he says he has a way of of being daicha the raya. The show to suggest that the raya is not a valid proof. So he tells the following story about Rick Vager. This is a beautiful story. This is worth, whoever's not here, you could tell it over to them. You could tell it at the Shabbos table. The crowding in the yeshiva Panovich, everybody wanted to daven in Panovich on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Narayim. When we're on Rosh Yeshivas, the Indians said, so they had numerous discussions with Yeshiva. What are they going to do? There's no space, and everybody, they were hanging from the rafters. If things got so bad, in Tafshin Nun Beis, which was 29 years ago, if things were so bad that they had to do something, they had to come up with an eitzah. And while they were considering different plans, they came up with a plan, easy plan, simple idea. They'll take away part of the Ezras Nashim from the women. They'll put a wall in the Ezras Nashim. והחלק השני ימשיך לתפקד כאזרס נשם. They'll cut the women's section in half. Some women can still come, but the other half they'll use for the bachrim. So that'll alleviate some of the congestion that's taking place in the yeshiva. So they thought it was a good idea. And no doubt, the justification was, look, women are coming. It's very nice. If there's space, they could come. But if there's no space, we have to take at least they were willing to give them half of the space. If you implemented that plan, 50% of the women would not be able to come to daven. The people who hatched the plan thought their feeling was that the first priority is for the Talmidim. If there's no other solution that makes sense, they have no choice. The Bachrim and the married fellows, the yeshiva is not, they didn't make the yeshiva Panovich for the women, they made it for the men. So they have a schus. They have that's even better than the case of Rabbi Zilberstein, because in Rabbi Zilberstein's Shaila, the question was in the shul. So in the shul, okay, you built it with an Ezras Nashim. So the shul serves the men and the women. They're equal members in the shul. But in yeshiva, once there was yeshiva, so the women also came to daven in the Ezras Nashim. But the yeshiva is not made for women. It's made for the Bachram and the young light. More or less, everybody accepted the idea. That's all. They all understood. Okay, everybody thought it's a good idea, but they needed to approach Rav Shach and get his endorsement. When Rav Shach heard the details, he said, okay, I need some time to think about this idea. He says he doesn't agree to this plan in any shape or form. And he explained why. Who are the women that come for davening for Yom Narayim? The women that have young children can't come to shul. It's either the women who did not yet have children, or Ravakos Mubagaros, or it's older singles, women who did not yet find a shidduch, Begam Nashim, and also teenage girls. See, this is how Gadol thinks. different the way everybody else thinks. The tefillah of such women are ba mitoch halev. It comes from the heart. Umistam heim mozilos devos kamayim b'tfilasan. And the likelihood is that they're going to be crying when they daven. Umisugalos afkia shemayim. Their tefillos will be able to break the barriers in the shemayim. V'inkenem arashach zal kol hayeshiva shalanu zukuka l'tefillos halol. The whole yeshiva needs these tefillos. The case that efshar limona milova. How can we stop them from coming? It's like one of those stories you read about the Baal Shem Tov. The story of the Baal Shem Tov, that there was this boy that came to shul. He was a shepherd. He didn't know the alphabet even. He didn't know how to do it. The only thing he knew was how to play a flute. And he was sitting through the davening with his father, and he felt so bad that he can't participate. And then at the end of the davening, he finally took the flute out of his pocket and he started playing the flute. That was his expression of tefillah. And everybody in the shul got so angry and they started yelling at him, Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah. They were blowing shofars. He wanted to blow the flute. So the Baal Shem Tov says, stop. There was a Gzeira in Shemayim. There was not going to be, there was imminent, there was going to be a bad year. And all of our tefillahs had no impact. Along came the pure tefillah of that young boy playing his flute. That went straight up to Shemayim, and that was more powerful than the rest of our tefillahs. And that undid the Gzeira. So, these kind of stories you hear from Hasidic circles. But Rosh Shach was not a Hasidic Rebbe, but Rosh Shach understood priorities. And he said, you can't take the women out of the shul. Their tefillos, aside from the fact that it could be, Rosh Shach didn't say that. He could have probably said another thing. He could have said that you have no right to cause these women so much pain. They want to daven in shul. It will be enormously painful for them not to be able to daven in shul. Maybe he held that way also, but he thought that this way it's a more convincing argument, because even the men who will be they will not be able to daven in the shul. They're going to benefit. The displaced men will benefit. They're better off letting the women daven than letting them daven, because the women's tefillos will be a bigger schus for the community. I told over this story many times. There was Rabbi Rabinowitz, I think it's Rabbi Rabinowitz, has a son with Down syndrome. So when and he was a Talmud of Rav Pam. So when the child was born, by now he must be about 30 years old. When the child was born, so his wife wanted to daven. It was a very hard year, and the boy underwent a lot of surgeries. Sometimes Down children need surgeries. So she was just exhausted, and she wanted very much to daven in shul, but the whole day she had to stay home with her child. So then when it came time for the Eilah, she asked her husband beforehand, maybe we'll switch places for the Eilah. You'll come home and you let me daven the Eilah in shul. So the Rabbi Rabinowitz went to ask his Rabbi Rav Pam. He was davening Torah V'das. And Rav Pam was the Rosh Yeshiva. So he asked Rav Pam, he told the Rosh Yeshiva, my wife would like to know if she could come to daven. He thought that Rav Pam would say, look, your wife is not a chiyuv. You have a chiyuv to daven tefillah b'tzibur. She doesn't, so it's more important for you to daven. So but Rav Pam was a gadol. So Rav Pam said, tell your wife, run home and tell your wife she should come, and you should go home and you take care of the baby, because her tefillos are so important. So 5 minutes later, he comes back to Rav Pam and he says, I had an idea. Maybe I should daven tefillah b'tzibur. I should daven the silent Shemona Esrei with the tzibur. I'll be yotze tefillah b'tzibur, and then I'll go home to my wife. Rav Pam got very annoyed, and he said, I told you to run home. Why are you still here? He threw him out. So so that was it. He told him. So you see, the Rav Pam held that even though the husband has a chiyuv, but the woman went through so much. His wife went through so much that is, in halacha there's always this concept of docha, essay docha losasei, essay docha essay. When you have conflicting interests or values or mitzvos, so there's rules how you deal with it. So that's basically what Rizal's Shai here is also. Who displaces who? What's the rule for this? So Rapam felt that if the woman needs for her emotional stability and to allow her to be able to daven properly, that takes precedence over the husband's davening with a minyan. The end of the story was that the following year, the Rabinowitz went back to Rapam and he asked him the same shayla. And Rapam said, this year it's better she should daven at home because that was Rapam was very close to the family, so he knew that it was an easier year. So he said this year she should daven at home. A gadol has a sense of perspective. That's why people go to gadolim to ask them shilos. Okay, so Adkan Hamaisa Shishamati. So Rabbi Zilzi said this is the end of the Maisa. So you could justify that, you could explain that maybe the reason why Rikveger wanted the women to stay in shul was because he felt that the women's tefillos are the most powerful, the more powerful. The women, even Shach said that you're going to have singles and people who don't have children. But the truth is, women in general have more feeling for tefillah, and they daven with more kavanah, and they cry more. So there's more. It's coming more from the heart when women daven, and that's why, as Izzy Rifkin correctly said, that all our halachos of tefillah we learn from Chana. We learned that you're supposed to daven with kavanah from Chana because her tefillah, she wasn't chayiv in tefillah, at least not with a minyan, but she was her tefillah was the epitome of Chana medaberes aliba, that she had tremendous kavanah. Okay, so therefore, the raya that he wanted to bring from the Kriega Eger to the Shaila, he's now has a way of pushing away the being docha the raya, because it could be the reason why Rabbi Kriega allowed the women to stay in the Ezras Nashim was not because the women have a schus to be there, and therefore, just like the men's section, half of the section goes to the men, so half of the women's section goes to the women with social distancing. That's not the reason. The reason is maybe because the women on Yom Noraim, it's very important for them to be in the shul on Yom Noraim. So then the Rabbi Zilberson says the following. So he says, even if you'll say that there are times when women take precedence over men, but it's not. You can't extrapolate to our situation. Sharei Rashach Bir Ber Heitev is a share Korah Ezras Nashim Yom Noraim. Rashach said that the women why the women could stay there is because it's Yom Noraim. They die with special kavanah. Mimela Muchan Muvan Lama Engavatos Nashim Ashur Slave Milaspal. But for the story of Shach, you have a right just the opposite. He said because they cry so much. When they dam Yom Noraim, they shatter, they break through into the barriers in the heavens. So we can't stop women from coming to shul on Yom Noraim. Ki dafka b'tfilas liber b'beis knesses im amiras eslichos yidim midos v'yutim yargishu hisoros miyuchedes b'tfilasan. B'dafka being in shul on Yom Noraim, they will have more hisoros and the tfilas will be more effective. Achin kol zeh Yom Noraim aval b'tfilas shekol shana. But it's from the story from Rashach itself, it's clear that he was allowing it for Yom Noraim because the women daven with so much feeling, and it's the singles and the women who don't have children coming to daven. But the whole year, it's not just the women who are broken that come to shul. But there are also live close to Shabbos. The people are not supposed to cry in Shabbos. The kolisha shemistaderla magila tispal. There's many women that come as long as maybe they get a babysitter, maybe they have one of the older kids watch one of the younger kids. He says so both the story with Rabbi Kveger and the story with Rashach are not the same as our situation because they were talking on Yom Noraim, both stories. but we're talking about the rest of the year. So the argument that women's davening, women's tefillah is more powerful, we don't have. And then he says, do you uyam b'trumas sedeshin. He says, furthermore, look in the Trumas Sedeshin, Uvidvar b'Ramah Arachaim. It's brought in the Ramah in Arachaim, Sof Simon Peches. Shebiyam and the Raim, Atfil basic nesses in the Chutza, Ma'od Avor Nashim. It's very important for women to daven in shul. Vaknisa le basic nesses b'zmanim elo also hanachas ruach. When they come to shul, they have tremendous satisfaction from doing that, religious fulfillment. There are those, there's a minute that we do not know either way. There is a minute when the woman's in nida, she doesn't come to shul. So Ramah says, even if you have that minhag, they can come on Yom Narayim. So, because you don't want them to have the agmas nefesh, the pain of not being able to daven with the minyan on Yom Narayim. So even without the svara of that the women are crying, but you see Yom Narayim is a special time. So it's easier to justify that women should not be displaced by men on Yom Narayim. And then, but rather than the rest of the year. And then he says another difference. There's also another difference. Yom Narayim is 3 days. For 3 days, they can have a minyan. It's not that they won't daven with a minyan. They'll daven with a minyan in their backyard. It's true that davening in shul is more inspiring, but on that, the men don't have a bigger schus than the women. The women also have the same schus to be inspired. The only shayla is that the men have a greater responsibility to daven, but they don't have a greater right to be inspired. It's not because it's more inspiring for them. But we're talking about a situation where it's long term. Nobody knows when the pandemic is going to end. You see, we still don't know. It wouldn't be right to have the men leave the shul for a long term. The truth is, when we first started, there were no backyard minyanim. We had minyanim in the shul. Nobody was making backyard minyanim. In fact, the Vad said nobody should make backyard minyanim because we felt that it's very difficult to maintain social distancing in backyard minyan. So there was no option for so the circumstances of the Shiloh were very much the same as our circumstances were. That there's no other place for the men to daven. If they're going to be displaced, they will have to daven at home, be yechidus. So the Shiloh remains whether or not the men have a bigger schus because they have a chiyuv, or the women have a bigger schus because this is their makom kavua. So he brought a raya from the Shuvah Kveger, but then he said the Shuvah Kveger is not a raya because he told the story with Rashach. So we're back to square one. What is the proper approach here? He says v'hinei yeshudash shekvar hayil olamim bikuach doma. Just like lahavdil, lawyers always look for precedents, and they'll search through earlier decisions that were made by the courts. So poskim do the same thing. So Rizilstein said that there was a very similar. There was actually a machlokas over a similar situation. The Hine B'Shaus L'Shuv is Bris Yaakov Lifshitz. The Sefer Bris Yaakov, which was written by Rav Lifshitz, he puts that in because there's more than one Bris Yaakov. Simin Ches Dam Be'inyan V'Kuach Shayim V'Naisi Shal B'Nias Beis Knesset Shel Nashim Tzomel V'Gvarim V'Zeh Harbe Taina V'Hayu Harbe Taina Kanakan. There was a machlokas whether they should build an Ezras Nashim for the women next to the men. And I'll show you in a minute what the shiloh is. I want to just show you one of the things that I love about learning Shalos Teshuvos is that it introduces me to authors and Sfarim that I've never heard of before in my life. And and I mentioned many times that I have my disc for Otzer HaPoskim, and Otzer HaChochma. This is my Otzer HaChochma. This disc, when I plug it into my computer, I get about 75,000 Sfarim from this. That's amazing technology. I always have to be careful because I have so much to do, and I could sit and scroll through the Otzer HaChochma the whole day. I have a Yetzer Hara, I mentioned. When I go to a cemetery, I have a Yetzer Hara to read tombstones. That's a little bit eerie. And I have a Yetzer Hara to just browse through Svarim. It's like it's Olam Haba. So here we're exposed to a Sefer Bris Yaakov. I mamish never heard of it. And the author was Baruch Mordechai Lifshitz. I never heard of him either. He lived, the Sefer was printed in Varsha in 1875, and apparently he was still alive at that time. The tshuva that we're going to see is dated. The tshuva had a date on it. Oh, I didn't put it in here. But the tshuva had a date. It was, the tshuva was, I put the date in here. The tshuva was written in Tafrei Yud Gimel, which I think was 1852 or 1853, if my numbers are correct. So I don't know anything. I Googled. Usually I'm able to find out something about the author from Google, but Google came up empty. There's no record of who Baruch Mordechai Lifshitz is. It says here on the bottom that he was Av Bez Medinas Rus. He was the Rav in Russia. Bekihilas Gedolos, in large communities. Bekila Kadisha Samatich. There was somebody famous that was from Samatich. I don't remember who. Was Rabbi Salvation from Samatich? I don't remember. Yisrael, was he from Samatich? I don't know.
That was Choslovich.
Oh, Choslovich, okay. Bekila Kadisha Valka Visk. And then, what does this one say? Anybody know?
Nevaradok.
The Gardic, that one we heard of. The Atta Bekila Kadisha Shedlitz. So he held many important positions, and I read through the tshuva inside. It's a magnificent tshuva. So he was obviously an Adam Gadol. What amazes me is how in the world did Rabbi Zilberstein know that there's a tshuva in Bris Yaakov about this? It's such an obscure sefer. There are literally thousands of tshuvas for him, and how in the world did he know that that there's a tshuva in the Bris Yaakov that parallels his shaila? So the answer is because he's an amazing Talmud Chacham. That's how he knew. So what was the shaila in the Bris Yaakov? The shaila was the following: there was a shul in the community, and there was no place for the women's davening. They didn't have an Ezras Nashim. Along came some people and they said, we've had the shul for 70 years. We never had an Ezras Nashim. It's about time that we made an Ezras Nashim, but they didn't have space to just build out an Ezras Nashim. They were going to allocate some of the men's section to be an Ezras Nashim. Then we could break out the wall, and that way they had some space outside that they would enclose, but they had to use part of the men's section. So naturally, the people in the community followed the Jewish minhag, which is to have a big fight, a big machlokas. There were some that said that it's wrong to do, and they had a number of reasons why it's wrong to do. Number one, the Jewish people, we're not big on change. We're very conservative. We have a Masorah. Masorah is based on the past. There was a famous expression that the Chassam Sofer, I believe, coined. Chassam Sofer battled against conservative Judaism, and he said, Chadash Asur Min HaTorah, the Isser of Chadash, of eating grain or foods made with grain that grew after Pesach, is Chadash, and in Eretz Yisrael, Chadash is also Midaraisa. It's a biblical prohibition. So Chadash also Midaraisa. So it was a play on words. New things, these newfangled innovations, it's also Minatara. There are many instances where poskim say that they don't think it's a good idea because it's a new innovation. We shouldn't be the. Ramosha has a tshuva about whether you could read Megillah with a over the telephone. Somebody that can't come to shul. I think in the same tshuva he talks about using a microphone in the shul so people could hear, because on Shabbos you can't use a microphone. So, but on a weekday you could use a microphone. So, is it okay to read Megillah over the microphone? So Ramosha says he was inclined to say that it would be okay, but he says it's a new thing. We don't do new things. You know, we're not going to start a new minhag of reading Megillah over the microphone. We should stick with the old-fashioned way of reading it without a microphone. I mean, sometimes you have no choice. Sometimes when they had the Siyam Hashas and they daven Mincha Marav, they used the microphone, which actually is a big shiloh because if you're using a microphone, you're not actually hearing the person's voice. You're hearing the sound of the microphone. So are you allowed to answer Yesh Mei Rabbah to or Baruch Hu to if it's not? I was at a chasana last week. We had the chasan. Usually when the chasan is around Mekadeshes, we move the microphone away, so the Eidim should hear the chasan. But the chassan jumped the gun, and or somebody who was there was holding a microphone, put it right in front of the chassan's face, and he said, "Aram Kadesh, put on the ring." And the question was, the Eidim. I was one of the Eidim. I didn't hear the chassan. I only heard the microphone. So was that a valid kedushin? I was there together with Rabbi Kalish. He thought that it's like a sukkah bosinyan. He didn't think it was a shiloh. But anyway. So that's the first reason that people had, because this is not a terrific example of this was machine matzahs. There was such a big machlokus that raged for years about machine matzahs. And one of the reasons that people were opposed to it is because Chadash Asim and Torah. We don't do new innovations. Matzahs are always made by hand. And then some people even argued that matzahs are supposed to be round. And you can't get round matzahs out of a machine. The machine matzahs come out square. So there's always this tension between new technology and old way of doing it. I mean, basically, we cautiously adopt new technology. I mean, we're using smart boards in yeshivas, and there's a wealth of material you can get from the internet. I mean, I when I prepare my shir, I always Google the topic. I Googled this topic. I couldn't find anything on the internet. But so technology has to be embraced. You just have to be embraced carefully, and you have to know how much. But anyway, that was the argument. The people said, we're not doing new innovations. It leads to preachers. The women come to shul, and they're going to want to see the men are want to see the women. It's a bad setup, bad situation. And Otan mispalim shalom mistajim imanashim begin harash yagia Ezras Nashim refugativa. The women are going to be more noisy than the men, and they're going to interfere with the davening. You see that they had in 1852 they had the same problems that we have with noise in shul. It's an old problem. It actually goes back. The Radvaz, who lived about 700 years ago, or the Rambam. The Rambam did away with Chazar Sashatz when he was alive because people were talking throughout Chazar Sashatz. So he did away with it. And then the Radvaz, about 100 years later, reinstituted Chazar Sashatz. So this is an age-old problem that people talk in shul. So he says, so Rav Zilberstein says, so that was on one side with the people that argued against Ezras Nashim. The other side were people that argued in favor. What were their tinus? The fact that it wasn't doesn't mean it shouldn't be in the future. So what if it wasn't? So they didn't do it because they didn't do it. But there's no reason why we can't do it now. And the second time, that the men will look at the women, the women will look at the man. You'll make non-transparent shades that the men can't see the women, women can't see the men. And as far as the problem with noise, there's ways you'll talk to the women, you'll ask them to please be quiet, or you stop the davening and say, could you please be quiet? So this Shiloh came up to the Bris Yaakov for Baruch Mordechai Lushitz. What's the right thing to do? So it's a long tshuva. I was thinking maybe we should learn the tshuva a separate day, but I decided against it. It's a long tshuva. So he gives us a synopsis of what the, and you understand there's certain parallels here, because the question here is, should we take away room from the men in order that the women could daven in the shul? In the case of Ezras Nashim, it's actually, there's more reason, in the case of Rabbi Zilberstein Shiloh, there's more reason to justify not taking the Ezras Nashim away from the women, because the women have a prior schus. They were davening there already. Here, it's the opposite. The schus, the people that have the schus of the men. The men were davening in the shul, and now they're going to lose some of their spots. So, but the women have less of a schus in this case. But let's see what, in the end, the Baruch is paskin that the men, they don't have a taina, that they should take away some of the space, use it for the women. He says, there's a Tosefta. The Tosefta is, there were different, the Mishnayos were written by the Tanaim, and Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi organized the Mishnayos, but in the back of the Gemara, you have Toseftas, which were written at the same period of time. They were written basically before, at least before the Churban, maybe just a little bit after the Churban as well, for maybe, 100 years or so. But they were written primarily during the Bayis Rishon, and but they didn't make it into the Mishnayos, but they were still recorded in the Tosefta. So the Tosefta says, Kofin b'nei ha'ir, zeh livnos lehem basic nesses. The people in the city are able to coerce each other to donate to a shul. Lichnos lehem sefer Torah neviim, and they should buy Sefer Torah and Nevi'im, so they'll be able to learn from them. And that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. So this Rav Lifshitz raises the shaila, this halacha that you force people to donate for a shul. Could you force them to donate for an Ezras Nashim? Very interesting shaila. He says, Rambam. He brings a raya from the Rambam. Shekas of kol makom sheish ba asar Yisrael sarach lo hachin lo beis sheyikansel l'tefillah. Any place that has 10 men, you have to have a place where they should daven. U'makom zeh nikra beis knesses, and that's called the beis knesses. The kofim meir is zeh livnos lehem beis knesses, but livnos lehem sefer Torah neviim ksuvim, and you could force them to buy sefer Torah, neviim, and ksuvim. They even though they were davening already beforehand, no doubt they were davening in their houses, but you're supposed to have a shul. You're not supposed to daven in the house. When we were in the gym, I remember going. I'm sure Harvey remembers, and Dr. Rifkin, Rabbi Dr. Rifkin remembers. There were these big meetings, shul meetings about should we build a shul, should we not? It's a lot of money, and what do we need it for? We could daven in the gym, and a lot of people said they like it in the gym. They should look at the basketball hoops. It's inspiring. But Baruch Hashem, those that felt that it's wrong. I quoted the Maisa of David HaMelech. That David said that he wanted to build a Beis HaMikdash because he said, I'm living in a palace in the Kodesh Baruch Hu. The Mishkan is outdoors. So so that was the shaila here. So that's what it says that you're kaifin. So he says the mashma l'shana shekol kviya hu rak basar gvarim shelchem tefil b'tzibur. The language of Rambam implies that you only force for men, because he says when there's 10 men, then you force people to have a shul. Then we won't force them. Okay, we're going to stop here. Please come back next week to find out what the conclusion of the tshuva was, I'm going to put this on the recording. So if you know anybody that wants to hear the recording, they'll be able to. I'll email it out to the shul. It's a pleasure seeing everybody, and I wish everybody a wonderful evening and a good night. Thank you for being here.
Shkoch, Rabbi, thank you. Have a good night.
Where are you, Bob? Bob Lancey's out. He's touring again.
Yeah, in Ohio.
Ohio. Are you voting there?
Vote?
We voted already.
All right.
Vote again. Go
With
to
Edison or with some, who knows where in Ohio?
Yeah, where are you in Ohio?
We're in East Harbor State Park. It's west of Cleveland, along the Lake Erie.
Okay. All right. Good to see you, Bob.
Thank you.
Well,
Same here.
everybody should have a good night. Okay,
Good
bye-bye.
night. Bye.
Good night.
Near Sandusky, I guess.
Yeah, right near Sandusky. Yes.
That's what I figured, yeah.
Yep.
Enjoy.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a great
My
evening.
pleasure.
All right.
Laila Tov.
Bye, Thank you.